For reaction, I'm joined now by Richard Mamabolo, who speaks for Popcru, that's the Police and Prisons Civil Rights Union. Good evening, Mr. Mamabolo. I wonder if you could give me the response of the union to that report that we've just played from Barry Bayman.
Look, whenever there are such challenges around our correctional centres, we are quite obviously concerned about it because obviously these conditions affect the inmates and our members. It then means that our members work under unsafe conditions, and of course the level of closeness or confinement within our centres are quite worrying, especially now that we are under a pandemic wherein you would expect that the infection rates would rise drastically. We have actually seen this rise in infections. So it is quite concerning. But again, among the observations that are made by the United Nations Standard Minimum Rules for the Treatment of Prisoners, these are called the Mandela Rules, there is a call for better treatment of inmates. And of course, the conditions within which they live under should obviously be a cause for concern. We also know that it includes the call for inmates to receive adequate health care and to just basically cut down on the rates of infections that could obviously be born out of such conditions. So it's a important factor that as a union we are concerned about.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly it is members of Correctional Services staff, so it's the prison wardens, I would understand, that are members of your unions. But there are some allegations within that report that if you want decent food, you have to pay, essentially suggesting that some of your members may be taking bribes. What's your response to that?
Look, our members are not the ones who directly make the food. In fact, it's actually correctional inmates as well. Certain inmates are obviously given that role and responsibility. But of course, these are allegations, and of course, I think if anything is to be done, would be to look further into those allegations. However, I think one of the problems is, especially with regards to the fact that our members work under harsh conditions. You know, there's overcrowding within our correctional centers and understaffing as well. So it is near impossible to have them being everywhere at the same time in ensuring that conditions become better. We've got 243 correctional centers in the country and 161,000 inmates. 43,000 of those, of course, are remain detainees. And of course, due to all these other conditions, we feel that clearly in dealing with the long-term challenges that we find within our correctional centers, we should ensure that they become self-sustainable. The tenderization processes within these centers, of course, have brought about a lot of corrupt elements and activities which we think would be dealt away with by ensuring that with the current 85% reoffending rate that we have within our prisons, if they were to become self-sustainable, this would ensure that we reduce this percentage, but as well as ensure that inmates get the sufficient skills which they could obviously utilize when they are released from incarceration, in ensuring that we reduce the population within our correctional centers.
You say that those allegations against potentially corrupt officials must be explored and must be investigated. Just to make the point that this former remand detainee speaks about buying meat from the people who cook the food, but he also says that they're connected with the police as well. So it's good to hear that you are going to be looking into those allegations. I think what's so disheartening, we know that our prisons are overcrowded, but what is disheartening is that prisons do get inspected, and despite the problems being flagged by the Prisons Inspectorate, nothing seems to change. That is awful for the detainees, but awful for the people managing them as well. What is it going to take to see action on this issue?
Yeah, look, that is what we're basically saying, that we think part of the solutions would obviously be to deal away with the tenderization process and ensure that correctional centers become self-sustainable. That in a way would obviously ensure that inmates do not lie idle. It would obviously reduce the levels of violent acts that have been taking place within our centers, the altercations therein, and of course this would give members of the DCS, our officials, sufficient capacity to actually focus on their core mandate, which is to rehabilitate. So that is why we think that dealing with all these basic aspects would lead to a center that obviously focuses on its mandate. Currently, we feel that our members are overwhelmed over the conditions that they have to work within, you know.
Yeah. Okay, so what I'm hearing you saying, and I must just make the point that Mamabolo, who speaks for the Correctional Services Department, has said that when it comes to the water situation, that is being addressed at this particular remand centre. Barry Bateman coming back and saying that the lived experiences of people who've sent him those videos is that not much has changed at all. So am I correct that your main problem is that the tender system is entrenching corruption, and in fact what should be happening is using the inmates to become part of the solution?
Definitely, inmates should become part of the solution. You know, the maintenance of correctional centers should be the role of inmates as well. You know, that would obviously assist in skilling them. We cannot just have inmates sitting and not doing much whilst you have tenders for all this equipment that needs to be fitted into different correctional centers. So that would obviously assist them in preparing them that when they are released, they would have skills to sustain themselves. I mean, we currently having challenges of jobs, unemployment challenge in South Africa is quite high, and of course with inmates being released, that is why we have most of them going back to prison. 85% reoffending rate is not something that we can deal with outside of the correctional centers. So correctional centers' core function, which is to rehabilitate, should obviously also include inmates making their own uniforms, their own beds, their own food. They should obviously be producing their own food instead of relying on the system of tenderization, because it does obviously have elements of corruption within it.
Oh, thank you. And very interesting insights this evening. That's Richard Mamabolo. He speaks for Popcru, the Police and Prisons Civil Rights Union, bringing in a very interesting point that indeed inmates could be part of the solution, fixing up some of the problems facing our prisons, moving away from the tender system, which, as we have known, often is vulnerable to corruption.